We ready, John?
Yep.
Turn the hearing aids down, Chief. Welcome to City Council meeting, November 9th of 2021. We appreciate your attendance here with us this evening. I'm Mayor Berube. Tonight we're going to obviously pinch hit here because Council Member Severing is not here this evening.
I think he's in Hawaii.
He's on his way home from a family vacation on an airplane. So he was assigned to lead us in the thought and the Pledge of Allegiance tonight, or invocation. So, John, I'm going to turn to you this evening. Would you go ahead and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and give us a thought or prayer at your convenience?
Okay, let's start with the pledge.
Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I just typed in good thoughts into the Google, so. So this is just it's a poster you can buy on Amazon. 7 rules of life. First one is smile. It always works out in the end. Second is be kind. You have the power to make people feel good. 3 is don't give up. If it doesn't work the first time, find another way. 4, don't compare. Everyone's on a different journey. 5, avoid negativity. Avoid negative thoughts, situations, and people. 6, make peace with your past. Focus on being present and creating a better future. And 7 is take care of your body and mind. One struggles to survive without the other. And that kind of goes along with the theme of a quote my dad enjoys a lot, which is worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but you don't get anywhere. And so, you know, I've been in my time with the city, I've been really impressed on how much the city focuses on the future and on positive impacts, and the residents as well. I don't think anyone's in the room that was there, but I once cried in a planning commission meeting because of how nice the residents were to each other, even though they had differing opinions. It was nice to see them working together to make a better project. And those of you who know I cry a lot, so it's not that unusual, but for what it's worth, just some things to apply in our lives.
Thanks, John. I'm glad you didn't cry when I put you on the spot. That's good. But it shows what a great city manager we have that can recover so quickly, right? So thank you, John. We'll enter into our consent agenda now. Council, staff, is there anything this evening that you feel would be in conflict personally or perceived as a conflict? So now would be the time to declare. I don't see any, so we'll move on. Our next item on the agenda is to look for an approval of the September 14th, 2021 City Council meeting minutes. Are there any comments or concerns regarding those minutes? If not, then I would look for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Ekstrom,
Second.
second by Councilmember Stoker. Is there any further discussion regarding the minutes? If not, all in favor of approving the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We'll now move on to our active agenda, public comments. And I would just remind those who are here, you could limit your comments to 3 minutes. And if you would step up to the podium here and state your name, and if you're a resident of North Ogden, we appreciate it. Just a reminder that if you would like to speak regarding something on the agenda this evening, now would be the time to do so. So we'll now open the meeting for public comments. John, if you would watch, see if we have some online
We do have one.
that would like to make comments. I appreciate it.
Brenda Ashdown, I live in North Ogden. I have a question that I want an answer to, so should I wait until the public comments at the end of the meeting?
Depends on what kind of answer you're looking for, Brenda.
The kind that I want.
All right, well,
What my question is that at the last Meet the Candidates night, the question was asked, when the city is looking to forward their water with their wells and stuff that's been talked about with the COVID money, are they going to interfere with the stump well? And so that's my question. Is it going to interfere with the stump well? That's what my house is also connected to. So I'm curious if my water is going to be affected.
well, I don't see Dave here, so I'll give you the best answer I can. It's not our intention to interfere with that well at all. Of course, all the water pretty much comes out of the same aquifer, but we think we have plenty of water there. So there are no plans or known intentions to interfere with that.
Thank you.
My name is Kent Bell and I'm a resident of North Ogden. I live at 2739 North, 450 East. And I'd like to address the agenda number 8, discussion and or action to consider an ordinance to amend accessory building standards citywide. I have a handout that I'd like to present to the council and then read from that handout, if that's okay. Give you that to distribute that.
Go ahead, we'll listen along since we're limiting 3 minutes, so go ahead.
I appreciate the council accepting public input and again, ask the council for a variance exception in allowing metal material in the use of proposed building we have applied a permit for. The council chose to forbid this material after a building in the past was built that didn't meet public standards. I feel that this one instance should not set the precedence for all proposed buildings using metal siding in the future. Just because one non-standard building was built, not meeting public nor city standards, should mean that all proposed buildings be exempt as well. Any permit application should be assessed on a one-on-one basis, taking into consideration unique situations. The building we chose is to be built by a proven company using 29 gauge metal that is powder coated to match our existing home, which is gray with white accents. The building will be within the confines of a 6-foot fence, meeting the city compliance with a parking lot directly in back of the property to the west, and a side field to the north, and another field to the south with a metal barn on it already. This building plan and company was chosen by us for the attractiveness and workmanship that would be an asset to our property, but most importantly, maintenance free, as we are getting older and would not have to paint it every 10 years or so. It would present a much higher cost for us to have materials used that would require regular maintenance and degrade much faster. We applied for this permit in August and have complied with all requests and would greatly appreciate this exception of the rule that was changed for one negative exception and hopefully can be allowed for one positive exception. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Corey Hightower, North Ogden. I've got some documents that I'll read as well. There's 2 pages per. This is in regards to the proposed addition of public trail at the village of Providence Point on Coldwater Creek. We're expressing our distress and concern regarding the path easement that was created along Coldwater Creek. We planned our home and retirement around the enticement and incentive assured by the developer and builder. You know, you all are aware of the laundry list of blunders and falsehoods which have been provided by the developer to the homeowners, residents, and North Ogden City. We purposely had our home built on the west end of the development in the 55 and older neighborhood in order to have a quiet, relaxed living. Our endeavors have been frustrated by the developer's lack of capable planning and land acquisition and follow through. However, others have been affected as well. Residents of Roy Lance HOA and Country Boy Estates subdivision are faced with losing large portions of their properties. And as you're aware, there is legal action has begun. Citizens and friends of Coldwater Creek have several concerns about the disruption of wildlife, encroachment of the environment, and effects on the water rights downstream. Furthermore, we contend, in addition to the proposed path, would disrupt the homeowner's privacy, disrupt the peace, and provide a haven of illicit activity. Homeowners would lose use of property we have purchased and paid tax on. A path connecting the subdivision already exists on the south side. There will be no access behind the homes on the west side of the development. The reason we were given is for the children to access the path to get to school. In order for that to happen, they would have to backtrack, which makes no sense. They would add mileage to their trip. If the trail is amended, it would solve several issues. Landowners would no longer need legal action to save their property. Coldwater Creek would not need to be moved, and it would allow Barrett to the ability to build on their 3 west lots. Our concerns would have been made earlier. We were deceived by the agent and developer and builder. Furthermore, it's not the right to punish the residents because the developer failed to act in a proper manner. We appreciate your consideration in all of this. We do have a signatures for many, well, the majority of the people that would be affected off of 150 East and in Village at Providence Point. So hopefully, I know that there's we're sick of making amendments for a certain builder, but this one affects more than just the builder. It affects the residents and our privacy. Our property actually goes across the creek. So even the easement, I don't know how much land there would actually be as we go across the creek. So thank you.
Thanks, Corinne.
Good evening. I wanted to address item number 6 tonight on your agenda. I'm Heather Bailey, and I live in North Ogden. For this item number, this is affecting the accessory buildings that are larger than 600 square feet, which at this time are requiring a minimum of 60 feet from any dwelling on an adjoining lot. And I believe that the Planning Commission is in favor of doing away with this ordinance, but I just wanted to speak to it and also advocate that this is an excessive ordinance that is difficult, as a lot of these accessory buildings are extensions or garages that go off of driveways, as is in the case for one that we're planning and hoping to get a permit for. And those driveways don't have to be 60 feet away from an adjoining dwelling, and where the ordinances are to be a minimum of 10 feet away, as our neighbor's house is. And this dwelling that we're hoping to receive a permit for is also an additional 10 feet away from our property line and set back slightly, but it's still quite a distance to get to that 60 feet, which places it considerably off of our driveway, which is the purpose of the additional garage that we're hoping to build. And with the other ordinances that you have in place with the impervious surface and the roof heights that continue to decrease the closer it gets to a property line. I think those are great ordinances in place to make sure that the overall effect of not building this monstrous building right next to your neighbor and causing them to lose views or to disrupt, their own personal property, that those ordinances already help with that consideration. And I think once again, this ordinance was put in place after one particular building was built in regard to the issue on the metal, and so the 60 feet was determined. And so I would just advocate that the 60 feet is excessive for most of the reasonable dwellings, and that the other ordinances that you have in place are sufficient enough to make sure that the things that are being built are not going to be harmfully affecting the neighboring properties. Thank you.
My name is Ryan Udell, 2708 North, 1325 East, North Ogden. My comments would be in regards to item number 6, 7, and 8. I would agree with Heather on the accessory building. My proposal would be if we were able to meet the requirements on the setbacks and the height, that the square footage wouldn't be limited necessarily by those factors. But if you were in R20, RE20, much bigger lots, I would propose that those same standards would determine what the square footage of that building could be. I think that you could put a much larger building, still not cover 50% of the lot, still maintain your heights, and it would look proper. Also, the 60-foot setback, I think, is excessive. If you're meeting the offsets that are required and you're meeting the height that is required, there's also a setback that you can be from the back of an existing home. And I think if all of those are met, also the square footage would be taken into account on the other qualifications as far as lot size and how much of the property you're covering with concrete or non-pervious surfaces. On the item number 8, the steel buildings, I think if you completely eliminate steel buildings in all of the R zones, depending on how you word that, you'll be affecting a lot of people. And I personally have a lot of clients who would like to build metal structures. Also have people who would like to build wood structures, but clad them with metal. And we are now seeing metal siding that simulates reclaimed wood, lots of other materials. And if you specifically say no metal building or no metal cladding, that would definitely affect the look. We're going to start seeing a lot more metal siding on buildings to simulate other products, and it could affect their ability to even match their house if it's not worded properly. That's my comments, and appreciate your time.
Hi, Rod Kearney, 3255 North, 800 East. I as well have some comments regarding specifically number 7, but it very well could play into some of these others. We have been in this process of trying to build for 2.5 years now. And basically it all comes down to 188 square feet. It's the size of an outbuilding. We are currently in the RE20 area. We are 3.59 acres. And again, currently we're limited to 2,500 square foot outbuilding, which is a good sized building. The plans that were drawn, the plans that are are trying to go through happen to be 2,688 square feet. That current RE20 from 3 to 4 acres, that's the difference of an entire acre. An entire acre is over 43,000 square feet. And to be limited, the same whether you're 3.0 acres or 3.99 acres, seems again a little excessive. The planning commission, I know, and again, like number 7 and 8, to kind of do away with the sizes, I have to agree with some of the others that if you follow setbacks, if you follow heights, if you follow some of these other things already set in place, it's pretty much going to avoid you from building an airport hangar. We have taken, a lot of extra time, a lot of extra effort, money to specifically deal with water drainage, water retention. I myself, my wife and I, we've been on the receiving end of other people's water ends up in your yard or your house, and it's not a fun thing. So working very hard to try to avoid those issues. We're spending the extra time and money to make this outbuilding, if you will, look a lot like the house. We are going to rock part of it. Garage doors will all match the house. I think there's a lot of things we could do with some restrictions, but just limiting the size of the building to that's it. I'm asking for help, I guess, for an exception, for an exemption, for something. Again, this has been about a 2.5 year process, and I'm stuck on 188 square feet. So I just really ask for something a little different. So appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Carney.
We do have one online there.
Okay, let's go to the individual online, John.
So Steph Casey should be able to speak now.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, Stephanie Casey, North Ogden. Sorry I can't be there tonight. I have gotten sick. This weather really kicked my butt. Anyway, I just wanted to make a comment. I'm listening to a lot of others comment on accessory dwelling units as well. You know, the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, I sat through many planning commission meetings where they discussed at length accessory dwelling units, sizing, materials. And I believe that the discussion was brought up by some residents who had come forward complaining about the negative impact a large accessory dwelling unit built on an adjoining property had caused them. It was brought to city council and approved. And I'm just wondering how it's brought back up. And it, you know, as I'm reading through, it says based on a permit request. And, you know, I'm wondering how many do we open this for every permit request that doesn't fit in the ordinance? And I have to say, you know, I disagreed with some things that was set in place on this ordinance. I did disagree with the metals and some of the requirements for the building materials. I felt that was a little bit of an overreach as far as requirements, but height, size, setbacks, they were discussed and really put to a lot of thought and approved a year ago. And So I'm just wondering, how many have we turned down other permits because they didn't meet this requirement? Why are we looking at it now because of a permit request? I'm curious as to know, why we're opening this up and looking at changing it. So I guess that's my biggest concern with this. Thanks.
Any other comments this evening? I know the council will have a thorough discussion on this, and I think that's a good question on how ordinances come about and how ordinances get changed, and it's an interesting discussion. So, any other, John, online?
Nope.
Anyone else here? Okay, we'll move on then. We'll get Mr. Mark Anderson to come and address the council. Mark is with Zions Finance. As you know, we're nearing the time where we need to make a decision on bonding for the public safety building. And we've engaged Zions Bank to kind of lead us through the process. So Mark.
Thank you, Mayor, and congratulations on your new unopposed term.
Well, I'll take it.
Condolences, one or the other.
I'll take it.
I've been talking with John and Jamie some about what's the current market environment in bonding, and what options might the city consider as they get closer to determining what amount that they might borrow and when that funding would need to be available. So we anticipate that the city will issue a sales tax bond, pledging the revenues from sales tax as a repayment source. We really are evaluating two options right now that the city might consider as to how those bonds might be sold. The one that John has up on the board there, this anticipates that you would have $8 million available for construction using a market underwriting. So you would have to go through, develop a preliminary official statement. You'd have to go through the bond rating process and get a rating, and then eventually go to the market, price the bonds, and subsequently close. Right now, as of today, our estimates are that your interest rate on a 20-year bond, I believe, would be 1.83%. Is that right, John?
Yes.
The true interest cost is 1.83%. There are more costs and more staff time to go through this process, but it's traditionally where you can find the lowest interest rates for bonds that have a term longer than 15 years and a par amount over $5 million. So this is something that we would certainly look at based on the size of your project. Annual payments on that, John, would be approximately what?
About $480,000
a year for 20 years. Another option that we'd like the city to give consideration to is the Bank of Utah has been very aggressive on doing private placement or purchases of debt. In the last 60 days, I've closed a $14 million transaction with Cottonwood Heights and another $6 million with West Bountiful. The interest rate, I was not able to get an updated rate today because the bank officer's hunting in North Dakota or Canada and won't be able to give me a rate until next week. This is a rate that I was able to get from him on October 19th. This shows a true interest cost of 1.96%. The previous amortizations, the schedule of the market transaction, when we ran that on October 19th, was 1.87%. So it was 0.04% lower now than it was 3 weeks ago, where we call it basis points. 0.01% is a basis point. So I would anticipate that you would see similar reduction in Bank of Utah's pricing if, when they would come back next week and tell us what rates that they might offer to the city. Now, in comparing the transactions on October 19th, there was about a $35,000 difference in total principal and interest payments over the life of the loan. So it's not a big number in the big scheme of things. And some of the advantages of going with a Bank of Utah type transaction is the bond is callable at any time, which means that if you want to prepay or refund it or refinance, you can do that at any time. The other thing is there was no responsibility for continuing disclosure, because when you sell bonds in the market and they're publicly traded, potential purchasers in the future want to know what the financial condition of the city is, currently versus what it was at the time the bonds were sold. And so there's an annual cost of probably $2,500 to $3,000 a year that the city would incur while the bonds were outstanding. Another option that Bank of Utah has made available, and West Bountiful took advantage of this, was they're willing to make and lend you more money than what you think you might need, with the understanding is if the project comes in within budget, that you could return any unspent funds within the first 2 years, and we would do what's called a strip call. A strip call means that any money that's returned would be equally applied to all future maturities, so you still have a level annual payment, which is nice. Another advantage of considering this is it's less work on staff's part to review the preliminary official statement, go through the rating process, and prepare for that. And I think there was one other item that I had listed in the email I'd sent to John. Well, if the city were to decide to go with a market issue, it would take from 40 to 60 days from the time that you made that decision before we'd be ready. We have to prepare the preliminary official statement. We have to review that. The city has to review it and say, yes, this accurately represents the city and this project. Then we go to get a bond rating and wait for that to return. And then we can advertise that official statement in the market for several days. And then we price the bonds to know exactly what interest rate the city would be paying. And then within 2 weeks, we would close, which is when the funds would actually be available to the city. So if we have rates that we're appealing from Bank of Utah, we could lock those for 30 days, and we've handled all of the preliminary formalities as far as holding the public hearing, adopting the parameters resolution, so we can move quite quickly. And we don't experience interest rate risk from the time you decide to how much money you want and when you want it delivered until you actually price the bonds, because the market fluctuates. That you can be certain of. The Fed's talking about cutting back the amount of debt that they're purchasing in the market, and they've talked about build-in interest rate increases in the coming year, which will likely have impacts on what interest rates will do in the future as the Fed does their easing, and the market kind of builds these things in as they in anticipation of them coming about. So I guess the question I have is, where do you think you're at in the process? Are you thinking you're far enough along? You know how much money you might want to borrow and when you might want that available? Do you have a preference as to either of those options that I've described?
We're getting pretty close. I think the council will see your recommendation on the contractor on the 23rd of November. I think construction is scheduled to get underway probably February, March timeframe. Be doing some preliminary work prior to that. So we're getting very close. You know, I looked at the exhibits earlier today and discussed them with Councilmember Swanson, who covers our finance from the council. You know, as we talked about the $35,000 potential difference, and you present value that back to today, it's pretty immaterial. And then I guess, Mark, the question I would have is the costs if we go the traditional route of underwriting, getting a bond rating, et cetera. What do you,
That's taken into consideration.
yeah, but what are the dollars there? Just because it is taken into
Well, a
consideration.
bond rating for something under $10 million is probably about $18,000. The underwriter cost to market the bonds is typically, you know, $5 to $10 per $1,000 of bonds that are sold. And when we price the bonds and determine who's the best bidder, it's a combination of interest rates and the underwriting costs. So it might look like a high underwriting cost, but if the interest rates are lower than the competitors, it still may be the best deal to take.
Yeah, I look at the total outflow of funds,
Yeah, total
whether it's
principal
interest or
payment
principal.
over time, sure.
Yeah, and $35,000 over basically 21 years for the benefit that we would get of early prepayment, being able to return the funds we wouldn't use, seems to be pretty attractive. What do you see on the downside, Mark, of this
You know,
from your
I don't
experience?
see any real downside. You know what you're getting now, where you don't know exactly what you're getting if you move forward on a market transaction. Could be better, could be worse. You have more flexibility moving forward. If, for example, you decided you wanted to issue more sales tax bonds in 5 years, you could decide to refund this at the same time if there was, you know, savings to be gained by doing that. So it gives you, or you can restructure your payments to better meet the cash flow needs of the city. So there's a lot more flexibility going forward to go that route.
I'm looking for the downsides because I think we see all the upside.
The only downside I can really see is there might be a potential savings in total principal and interest payments. But the one thing that isn't taken into consideration that I mentioned earlier is you have those ongoing continuing disclosure costs as long as the bonds are outstanding. So that will easily offset the $35,000 in savings that where you wouldn't have to meet those requirements.
I'm going to ask Councilmember Swanson to chime in here. We had a discussion earlier, and I think the council would appreciate your thoughts on this, Councilmember Swanson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in the Oompa Loompa seat. So it doesn't rise, so I haven't shrunk over time. It's just I'm in that special seat today. I agree with you, Mayor. As I looked over the information that you sent us, Mark, it didn't make any sense to not go with the private offering route.
So with Bank of Utah.
With Bank of Utah. Yes, there's an increase, you know, total principal and interest, those kinds of things, $35,000 over 20 years. But as you mentioned, if we go with the market, we're looking at $2,000 to $3,000 a year over 20 years to provide the information. Well, that's $40,000 to $60,000 that we would have to expend over the next 20 years. That far exceeds the 35. For me, the salient points were the ability to refund what we don't use, to pay it off at any time early without penalty. You can't calculate the value of those. Traditionally, we're locked in for about 10 years or so, 10, 12
Yeah,
years.
there's typically a 10-year call protection
On a market.
Prepaid.
Right. So we're locked into making payments for 10 years. Things go well economically and we're able to pay this off early. We ought to take advantage of that. And it's nice to have that. I think it's worth the 35,000 additional to have that avenue alone.
Okay, council, any questions you have of Mr. Anderson? I think you hit it on the head, Councilmember Swanson. $35,000 over 30 years is eaten up by the reporting requirements over time. So I think this is the most fiscally responsible decision as we look at it, even though we haven't concluded the final bond amount yet, Mark. Hopefully we'll have that soon so that we can give you a number. Our intent is to try to garner as much cash to inject into the project as possible so we can limit indebtedness, but we should have that very soon. So, okay. Councilmember Ekstrom, do you have any questions for Mr. Anderson?
No, as I was listening to the two options, that one seems like the no-brainer to me. I mean, that was, with all of the options available, that seemed like a really good way to go, especially considering the reporting requirements that, you know, we're gonna cost money every year, and those can also go up.
Mhm.
So you've got some risk there as well. So that sounds good to me.
Okay, Councilmember Walker, do you have any thoughts or questions you'd like to share?
If we're, and I'm agreed that we should use the Bank of Utah option, why can't we just say go forward, we have an amount, we're gonna pay back whatever we don't need?
You've got a 2-year period of time you'd be paying, you'd have negative arbitrage on that. We're probably earning 20 or 30 basis points on our money. So for 2 years, you'd be paying interest on the extra money.
I thought we could pay it back at any time.
I think, did you say during the first 2
Well,
years or?
In the first
Strip
2
call.
years, you can return any money that you aren't going to need for the project.
Okay. My understanding is though, Councilman Barker, the fixed payment would be based upon the initial amount. They don't re-amortize, we just pay the bond off quicker.
Well, the strip
understand that.
call would apply any money returned to all future maturities, to where you would still end up with a level amortization, equal annual payments, you just all annual payments would go down.
We
Unless
just,
you wanted to do something different. The way that Bank of Utah does do their call provisions is if you only do prepayments, they would normally apply it only to the next maturity. So they have serialized coupons, or the interest rates in year 1 from year 20 will have an ascending rate. So maybe start at 0.5% and end up at 2.7% or something like that. So, but there's an advantage to apply it to all maturities, because then you can apply it against the higher coupons as well.
I guess the question would be, would the payment be fixed on the original borrower, or would they re-amortize it based upon a lower payment if we?
They would re-amortize it.
Okay, then, yeah, your point, Councilmember. Councilmember Stoker, do you have anything you'd like to add? Okay, the council has been authorized to issue up to 10 million.
10.5.
10.5 million. We have, so we can make that decision as we get that balance here very soon. We can make that decision.
So Mayor, with regard to arbitrage, the city finds itself in a position where they are subject to arbitrage if the funds are reinvested at a higher rate than what the bond interest rate is. So right now, I think the last PTIF rate of return I saw was 0.31%. And we're looking at an average of 1.9-ish%. So I don't expect that the city will be subject to arbitrage.
Wait a minute, if we're earning 31 basis points on the excess money we have and we're paying 190, there's a negative arbitrage of about 160 that we'd be paying on the money, because where are we going to invest the money?
Well, I understand what you're saying. I guess the question is, you're going to be making those payments over 20 years, regardless of when you start the payments. And it probably really is a matter of whether or not you have the cash flow to start doing it, say December of 2022, the first principal payment, or the cash flow is such that you want to wait.
All right, any other questions? All right, council, then we'd be asking for a motion to proceed based upon the recommendation with the option to pursue having a placement with Bank of Utah so that Mr. Anderson can go down that path and start gathering the information and get an updated rate when he returns from hunting. So I need a motion to pursue the avenue of the placement with Bank of Utah. Do we have a motion?
So move there.
Thank you, Councilmember Swanson. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Councilmember Ekstrom. Any further discussion? All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Does that give you adequate direction, Mark?
Yeah, I just need an amount. And you to tell me when to lock the rate.
We'll be in contact with you in that regards. As soon as you get a rate from Bank of Utah, if you'd let
I'll
us
share
know.
with you when I get it next Monday.
Okay,
And we'll do an amortization to show what the true interest cost is.
okay. I think just a reminder to those who are listening in and those who are present tonight, our budget, we budgeted to have in excess of $500,000 of revenue over expenses. So we budgeted with adequate funds to pay the principal and interest. With the information we have now, there would be no need to adjust property taxes for the payment of this building, which is the commitment I think we made. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Mr. Call, you wanted to talk about the general fund balance this evening, so go ahead.
So council, part of the reason why we don't have that number for you yet on exactly how much cash we have available is that we wanted to just touch on this subject with the council on what are the fund balance amounts that the council would like to set as kind of the floor for where we would go. And the idea is that we would also like to, as we establish this number, create a policy so that we know when we would go below that floor. So a good example is if we say across all city accounts, or let's say the general fund, we want to keep 15% of the money of our annual budget as a fund balance there, then the question would be, when would we ever dip below that balance? And so it's a two-part question. One is where do you want the floor at? And the second question is, what reason would you cause to ever go below that floor? And the reason I ask that question is, it's called the rainy day fund. It's the money that's there if we have an emergency, if we have something happen. And so I think it'd be good for the council to define, if we're going to define where the floor is for normal operating activities, then what are the things that are outside of those normal operating activities that would be dipping into the rainy day portion of the fund. And it's not intended to be a conclusion reached tonight. I believe, in fact, we just put it up for a discussion tonight to kind of talk about it. But it was suggested in the past to shoot for 15%, which we think would be right about, or this year would be about $1.4 million. And so the question would be, what is that? Does the council feel like that's a good, comfortable level? And with that information, Jamie can then get some numbers crunched together to figure out how much cash we have available in general fund to move towards a down payment on the police station project, in addition to the money that's available in our general or in our capital projects fund, which was also earmarked for projects like this. And that would allow us to come up with a cumulative total of money that the council can then put down on the project, or the city can put down on the project. And then we'd know the final bond number for Zions and the Bank of Utah to issue. So wide open discussion. It could be a 5-minute discussion. It could be an hour. I know everyone in the audience is hoping for an hour. So, and Jamie, the finance director is here, can also answer any questions you might have about current balances, not exact, but current numbers, current projections, general feeling about where we're headed, if you'd like as well.
Okay, thank you, John. I did see some of the citizens holding up signs, hour and a half. I don't know if they wanted to end the meeting in an hour and a half. Mr. Mason, you were holding up the sign. Did you want to end it in an hour and a half, or do you want this discussion to be an hour and a half?
ironic question. I'm double booked. I'm looking to present something else to you guys in a bit, so
Okay,
I'm going for 5 minutes.
all right. We'll try to accommodate you then. Council, just a reminder, in our previous discussion, we did agree to set the floor at 15%. We did agree to keep for unknown opportunities that come along $1 million in the capital improvements fund over and above the commitments we have. And John, I think we have a commitment of, now the general fund is a 1.2 million for the pond. Was that total with 300,000 out of storm?
So
sewer?
yes, that's the total with storm.
So we got about a 900,000
Yeah.
commitment that we need to make sure we have there. I guess on the, when would we dip into that rainy day fund is only if absolutely necessary, after we've looked at every opportunity to control expenses. That would be very seldom we'd want to dip into that, only after we've done everything else to make proper revenues and expenses. So I don't know, John, if you're looking for more detail than that, or if the council has. But I think when you call it a rainy day fund, you use it not when it's sprinkling, but when it's pouring. And hopefully we wouldn't have to dip below that, but surely we could. So.
And to put it into perspective, you know, as our income has grown as a city, that 15% number changes. And so there might be some logic to that. The goal is we set it at that 15%, which this year is 1.4 million. And either you hold it at 1.4 million, or you let that 15% grow with the city's budget every year. And the reason I say that is probably 6 years ago, a good example is we actually took our general fund but balance down to about $800,000 or $900,000, which at that point was about 15% of the budget. And so just to kind of put it to perspective, it'd be good to define what the use is and what the goal of that money is, so that I guess the goal from a staff is if we can establish policies that the council has to contemplate and amend in the future, then there's some logic behind why there's $1.4 million sitting there for the council to talk about and push against if that number is ever proposed to be changed, if that makes sense.
I believe last year during COVID, we anticipated using about 600,000 and we didn't use any.
Correct.
I believe also our budget this year has excess revenues over expenses of about 500. And our first big payment wouldn't be due till, I think, was it March of 23? We have interest payment
yes.
prior to that, but I think it's March of 23 would be the first significant, or is it March or May?
It is May.
So we'll have an opportunity to increase that. It would seem like to me that we'd want to stick with the 15% because as revenues grow, the demands also grow. So we ought to try to increase the dollars available there in case of need, but it's a council decision. Councilmember Stoker, do you have anything you'd like to discuss? Okay. Councilman Barker, anything you'd like to add?
I like percentage better than fixed amount.
Okay. Councilmember Ekstrom.
I agree. I think 15% is a good conservative and reasonable amount, especially as the city's budget, the city's size, the city's needs all grow. It grows proportionally. And I think that's, plus the rainy day, I think we got a dry run on that with our COVID projections, right? And I think we've shown that we can trim when we need to and pray that it all works out, and it generally has. So I think that's a really just a good.
And just as a reminder, the maximum that used to be held in the general fund was 25% of revenues exclusive of intercompany transactions.
So did the law change on that?
Law changed now up to 35% to do that. So we were able to live with 25% for years. So I don't think 15% is too bad. Councilmember Swanson, you're the council member that oversees finances. What is your?
I like the
input?
percentages as well. I think the only perhaps brief conversation to have is what do we do in the event of an economic downturn? Not necessarily a rainy day, but we do see sales tax and those things going down. Do we then allow that 15% to drop to a lower number, or do we maintain the previous year's number and wait for the economy to turn back around?
Yeah, I think from previous discussions we've had, if we see that, we've actually made a commitment, if house values go down, that our property tax revenues would go down accordingly, holding the rate steady. So I would think that, as I mentioned, the only time we would dip into that is after we've done everything to make sure we're providing services in an efficient and effective way. And if there's no, it'd be a last ditch option. It wouldn't be the first option.
Yeah, I'm good with the 15%.
Mr. Call, do you need any other information?
No, Jamie and I will work on coming back with some policy recommendations and we should be good to go.
Jamie, did you have anything to add?
I know, this is great.
All right. Mr. Mason, we almost made your 5 minutes, so we'll move on to the next item then. This is item number 6. This is regarding a discussion or action to consider an ordinance to amend the accessory building standards in residential zones. Brandon Bell, our associate planner, will be making that presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. This was brought to you about a month ago. And it was directed to, we ended up taking it back to the planning commission. I'm not going to read my entire report tonight because I think that you're familiar with a lot of the issues, but I'm going to make a few summary points. Staff's view is that on this topic is that there's not a one size fits all solution or a perfect solution, but I believe that a range of solutions exist that should balance the sets of rights of property owners desiring to build accessory buildings with those who are the neighbors of those property owners who are maybe impacted by a building, and the right balance that eventually is struck should strive to meet both interests of both parties to at least to some degree or another. The ordinance that is on the table tonight for my item is almost exactly the same as the ordinance that you saw about a month ago that creates a setback that is determined by the height. The taller the building gets, the farther it needs to be away from the property line. And so there's a 45-degree angle here that represents that principle. Is with an increase of height, there's a corresponding increase in the required setback. There is one adjustment to this version of the ordinance on that topic, which is that 45-degree line starts at 5 feet as opposed to 3 feet, which would make it, with regards to the rear setback, to have the maximum setback be 20 feet instead of 18, which would bring it to be consistent with the home setback and accessory dwelling unit. Just to be clear, one clarification to a comment that was made. This addresses accessory buildings, which and planners like technicality. So an accessory building is different than an accessory dwelling unit. This does not address accessory dwelling units, which involve buildings that are separated from a home and allow someone to live in them. This accessory buildings are a separate category, and they address typically their shops or detached garages or things like that where there's not someone living in them. The other point is that just to give a summary of the Planning Commission's recommendations, they recommended that and this addresses the other change that in the ordinance that that was made since the last time you saw it is that they recommended that the size restrictions on the building be removed for the R1 zones. And previously, the prior version of the ordinance recommended that there be a 1,500 square foot size limit for properties that were less than an acre and 2,500 square foot for properties that were greater than an acre. Those are removed from this version of the ordinance. The recommendation of the Planning Commission on that topic was that if we address the height and the setback issues, that the property owners should be addressing the interests of the neighbors on that topic and how they may be affected. And so that this ordinance reflects that change. The other, let's see, there are two other ordinances that are being considered in the next two agenda items. Staff's suggestion is that to the council is that discussion on this ordinance be delayed until the next item is considered as well and presented on. And the reason for that is because of the Planning Commission's recommendation, which was they believe that accessory buildings should be treated the same in a wide range of zones within the city. This ordinance that you're considering as part of agenda item 6 only addresses the R1 zone, so R1 8, R1 10, R1 12.5, and might have missed one, but I think that's all of them. And so their view was that the rule should be more uniform in those zones, but also in the RE20 zone, and then the HP1, HP2, and HP3 zones. And so that's our reasoning for recommending that be the discussion be delayed to until you had item 7 presented to you so that they can be discussed, because that item 7 deals with the RE20 zones, the HP1, HP2, and HP3 zones as well. And so it'd be one way to address the issue more holistically. So the Planning Commission also noted that that materials, they are of the opinion that materials restrictions that are currently in place do have had an impact on the number of accessory buildings that have been built in the last year and a half since the last time there was an ordinance change. I also made comments to that same effect that there have been a number of people that have applied for buildings that have not had that have not pursued those because of the restrictions that are currently in place. We're not making a comment on whether that's a good or a bad thing. We're just saying that the current ordinances has had an impact. We do get complaints from both sides of the issues as staff when an ordinance on this issue comes in effect. We get them both from the property owners that are wanting to build something, but also from the neighbors as well. I think that covers any of my comments. There's one more thing. There is a reference in this current ordinance that refers to metal buildings, and that's the third of these 3 agenda items that are presented, which is item number 8. And in the current ordinance under item number 6, which I'm presenting on, it does state that there's a separate height limit for metal buildings. Staff, we didn't feel comfortable updating that because the recommendation of the Planning Commission on that topic was actually that the metal restrictions should, the restriction on being able to build metal accessory buildings should stay in place. We have a commission member here. I'll let him speak to that issue, but I believe the motion on that topic was unanimous by the Planning Commission, and so it was a broadly shared opinion. And so we didn't feel comfortable adjusting that portion of the ordinance when they were recommending that the restrictions on metal stay in place. And so what staff's proposal is if there's a change in the issue of whether metal buildings should be allowed or not, the staff can address that as a minor correction for the height limit for metal buildings in R1 zones as part of the code update that's upcoming sometime soon.
Brandon, just help me understand this. If we're making an adjustment because there was someone in the city who had plans submitted that needed a height in the building.
That's correct.
We've now had several people come to us saying, you know, they had the submitted plans and couldn't build because we didn't allow metal. So how do we distinguish what we're going to do when and how, when we've got citizens that are both in the same situation, one with height, one with buildings? And I understand the Planning Commission is not in favor of metal. I've had a chance to talk to most of the council members here, and I think we're going to find that metal is something that numerous of the council members feel is important to allow people to build what they need to build. So how do we distinguish when and why we're going to make these type of changes? Because we've got a gentleman that's here tonight. We had a gentleman come last time, and apparently we've denied numerous applications because of metal. So I'm a little bit confused on why we're separating these things out, which is the same question I had last time.
I would say that I think you need to evaluate whether allowing metal and the building and adjusting the standards on ordinances is a valid interest of or impact on neighbors. You know, obviously you have the property owners who want the metal buildings, right? That's that group of people. But is it a valid restriction on a property owner to say, well, you shouldn't be able to build, you know, using a metal building because of the impact that is on your neighbor? I don't propose to answer that question, but I think that's the right question.
But I mean, a neighbor could come in and say, height is a big issue to me. So, you know, we just got to kind of look at this, in my opinion, of overall. I know we need to act on this thing. We kicked it down the road several times. So I think Brandon has asked council to defer further discussion and a motion on this till we review both 7 and 8.
And
Is
then,
that correct?
that is correct. And then one final point, Commissioner Mason is with us tonight. He mentioned that he was double booked. And so staff would also just make the comment that it might be helpful for him to be able to make his comments prior to agenda item 7 so that he can get to another commitment.
Jazz game doesn't start for a couple more minutes. Council, I guess it would be up to you if you want to hear from Mr. Mason at this point in time. Council Barker? Okay. Mr. Mason?
Okay, thank you. I'm Brandon Mason, a resident of North Ogden and a member of the Planning Commission. Like you, we've debated this issue a number of times. This has come before us, not just recently in our public hearings in our last meeting, but about a month ago, I came before you and presented my opinion both personally and as a member of the Planning Commission. It's not the first time we've heard these things. You know, I've heard about accessory dwellings a number of times. We've heard the pros and cons of, I've heard from neighbors who do not like what's being built in their neighborhood, who want it stopped, who don't want this monstrosity to occur again. I've heard from residents who very much think it's too limiting to what we're doing with accessory dwellings, or accessory buildings, excuse me. So I do think the city's struck a pretty good balance as far as having half the people angry for one reason and half the people angry for another reason. And I think government's doing a pretty good job when it's in that balance. So, however, the issues that we are recommending here, we think allow what is generally considered not wanted in the city. It does a good job of addressing those without trying to be so limiting as to reach too far. For example, in the size of the building, what is it about size that would be deemed offensive? Well, it's okay, it blocks my view, it's too close to my property, it's too just big for my perception. But then if you expand that out, think, well, what if somebody buys 2 or 3 lots and this happens? Should they not be allowed to build a building that's set back and it is not offensive? It's big and it's bigger. And we think what we've suggested here allows that. That size itself isn't what's offensive. It's the proximity to the neighbors, it's the height, and it is the building materials. And we really wrestled with the building materials because what is it about metal that would be so offensive? And I think you guys were presented evidence a few weeks ago of some beautiful structures. I didn't see them, but I sat in the audience. You saw some beautiful structures that happen to be made out of metal. And we acknowledge that. However, we couldn't come up with a way to define what would be generally wanted and generally not wanted. I know personally, when I lived in Harrisville, there was a corrugated steel building that was built in our neighborhood, and the neighbors hated it, and it was allowed, and it was built, and we didn't know how to draw that line. So where the ordinance says that the building materials of the home have to resemble the building materials of the outbuilding, we thought that was a pretty good factor. We don't think that the ordinance can be, we couldn't think of a way to rewrite the ordinance to allow, for example, this gentleman's building without opening the floodgates to what is generally considered unwanted. So I encourage you to really, like I said, we've spent hours on this, hours and hours, and I think we've come to what I feel, and I could be wrong, is a pretty good balance of this. I encourage you to adopt the ordinance as given to you tonight. I think it addresses the individual points that we're trying to address without being so far reaching that we're going to keep some of the pool houses and things like that out of North Ogden. As I thought about this, I had this kind of epiphany, and again, I could be wrong, and I might be insane, and I don't know, but I think that allowing larger buildings and things actually leads to the diversity of housing and building structures in our city. Whereas if we make it so limited and so cookie cutter, then we're going to get a lot of the same type of houses on the same type of lots. And I think if we expand this a little, as we're suggesting, we're going to see some diversity. We're going to see people gobbling up 2 lots so they can build a house in a big shop, or a house in a pool house, a house in a gym. And those are some uses of these buildings that I think sometimes we think, oh, they're all going to be garages, and it's going to be a mechanic, and I don't want that. And they are going to be garages, and we heard evidence from residents that we're going to use it for that, and I just didn't find that to be an offensive use to put a 4-bay garage on a big acre lot. I think that's a pretty good use of the land, regardless of what zone you're in. So the other thing that's going to be before you tonight is, should this be only given to the R110 zone or the RE20 zone? And we went through those in granularity. We went through each zone and debated the pros and cons of what we've suggested in that zone, and we feel like it fits. So regardless of the zone, it's a real good use of the land. If there is the space, no matter, even if it's in an R110 zone, somebody has 2 to 3 lots and those exist, or a 20,000 square foot lot, should these larger outbuildings be allowed? And I just couldn't think of why they shouldn't. So thank you for your time. I'm going to sit around for a minute, and I really have to go. So
Yeah. How big does it have to be, Brandon, to have a full-size basketball court in there?
full-size basketball court, I believe has to be, did we decide 6,000 square feet?
Because I know that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, I use that as an example. I mean, the best use of one of these buildings I've seen is out in Far West. I think many people here have probably played basketball there. There's a full-size gym out there. It's an outbuilding. It's an accessory building. It's big. It's beautiful, and it fits really nicely in that neighborhood. And it didn't have to do anything weird like we have to in our current ordinance, which is build a land bridge, across to. Right now, you can have these buildings if you just hook them to your house.
Right.
So, do we value shingles, or do we value 2 different buildings with maybe a path between them? And I would suggest the latter.
I think you're right on that. Just getting a bridge there doesn't make a whole bunch of
Yeah, but
difference.
that's what's going to happen if we.
Yeah, well, we have that over in the subdivision there off 2750, right?
Yeah.
The only way somebody could do it is to build a connection to the house. And I agree, Brandon. I think we've got to be careful not to do overreach. And I think, the current ordinance probably has some overreach in it. I'm just trying to say I want to be fair and equitable to all citizens, and to one, height is important, to another, metal is important.
And we left limitations on the height. I mean, you're not going to be able
Right.
to build an 80-foot tall outbuilding.
I don't have, as I've said, I don't have a problem with 25 feet height,
We felt
because
that was-
houses can be 35 feet, so.
Yeah, and I hope it's acknowledged that I think that there are beautiful uses of metal for outbuildings, and it would be an enhancement to the neighborhood as opposed to some of the traditional things. But I challenge you to try to craft that in an ordinance. We couldn't come up with it, so we recommend it be left as is.
Yeah, the only answer to that is metal, whatever they do, whatever they can afford to put up.
So we did have public hearings on this. The public spoke largely, not 100% actually in favor of what we've suggested. It should be noted that the people in attendance were generally general contractors and.
Well, I think it makes
They're
sense.
representing a desire out there.
I think the staff has done a good job of, letting the setbacks dictate the size. I like that. I think there's some good concepts in there. The only problem I have is being equitable to all of our citizens in regards to their requests. So
So I
thank
sleep
you.
at night with
for-
this recommendation. So
Okay.
again, it's your decision and that's why you were elected in. So good luck with that.
And thanks for your work on this in the commission. So thank you. The pay is so great, we can take it all. All right, council, do we need a motion to defer action on this till we hear item 7 and 8?
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Barker,
Second.
second by Councilmember Swanson to defer a decision on this until we hear items 7 and 8. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we'll now then move on to item number 7. Scott Hess, our planning director, will be leading that discussion.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council and Commissioner Mason for coming out. I think that it's worth hearing this part of the discussion just because we did go through this granularly. We went through each of the zones and ultimately it was determined to apply this consistently across them. So I have a bunch of chicken scratch. I'll address it here on the board in just 1 minute. Mayor, I wanted to get back to your question about how these things come forward to the council. And in these 2 particular instances, when you deny a building permit, you give them an opportunity for, what is your recourse? You can appeal our decision. Those decisions are administrative. You can come to the council and discuss your concern. You can pay $350 and apply for your own rezoning text amendment that happens. So there's a number of ways these things happen. In the particular case of the metal building, I encouraged them. It was on an evening of a city council meeting, and I said, there's always open opportunity to have public comments and come and raise your concerns that this is not something that you're able to do in the city that you desire. So you could largely blame me for how that's.
No, I'm not blaming you. We love to hear from the citizens. I just want to make sure we're addressing them equitably and equal in their concerns. So
And I think
they're always
that-
welcome.
And I think it was, it's really good for the council to be responsive and pull back and say, let's address this all as a blanket, one issue. They're all interrelated. Which gets me to the point of what we call the other residential single family zones, essentially. So we have residential R15, that's 5,000 square foot lots. That's approximately 8 dwelling units per acre. A subdivision here near the city council that was developed under that has a homeowners association with CC&Rs that disallow accessory buildings. So right now in the R15 zone, which I would guess was created in some ways to fit that particular development or a development, is silent on accessory buildings, and the planning commission felt like that's fine. So those are small lots. So currently you can't get anything from a tough shed up to any accessory dwelling or accessory building on an R15 zone. That's something for the council to consider tonight in that info, as we go through the information. Then you have the R zones, R18 through R110, R112 and a half. We've discussed those. The reason we were looking at those in isolation is, again, we had an applicant request that appealed to the council. The council directed staff to consider accessory building standards in that zone. And then from there, it's now just sort of ballooned into all the other zones. Residential RE20, which is an agricultural zone, residential city center, which is kind of a hybrid zone of, it has some multifamily, some large lot, single family, some agriculture, and the historic downtown core here of the city, just really across the street from the city hall. And then our hillside protection zones 1, 2, and 3. Just a note that HP1 is essentially a hillside hybrid of R110, and HP2 is essentially a hillside kind of proxy of R112 and a half. From all of your standards, as far as the size of the lots go, 10,000 square foot, 12 and a half square, or 1,000 square feet. And really what the HP stands is stands for is that those are areas that are more sensitive. They require additional geotechnical analysis in order to develop them. But by right, they're essentially the same zone. Our HP3 is larger than 2 acre. It's more akin to like the RE20. But there's just a lot of inconsistency in our accessory standards for our buildings. So for RE20, there's this gradient. If you're an acre, you can build a 1,500 square foot building. 1 to 2, 2,000, then 2,250, 2,500, 2,750. And I interjected in the planning commission meeting while the planning commission was talking about the R1 zones, just to point out that if you have 1.1 acre, you could, under the previous ordinance, have built a 2,500 square foot building, which requires 3 to 4 acres in the RE20 zone. So there's just this level of inconsistency. The RCC zone operates off of a formula that is 1/2 the square footage of the main building up to 1,000 square feet, and you can build 15 feet tall. And then the HP zone is 25% of the footprint of the main home, no limitation on size at 15 feet tall. And the Cove, which is the primary area you have quite a bit of HP developed, has homes that range from, 2,000 square feet up to 10,000 square feet of all sorts of configurations. Some are multi-level, some are a large rambler. So, if you decided to build one big sprawling rambler, you could get one really big accessory building. And it's just kind of it's interesting how different they are. And I think there's probably reasons for each of them in their time when they were developed to have those differences. But to make this really short, what the planning commission ultimately determined is that 25 feet tall at 20 feet away from the property line, and then utilizing no maximum size, but rather focusing on the lot coverage within the zones was the most equitable way to do that. And to kind of circle back now, what that means is for the R1 zones, there's a 25% rear yard coverage percentage that they could build. So whether you're a 1/4 acre or 1.5 acres, you have 25% of the area of what's deemed to be the rear yard. In the RE20, it's no more than 50% vegetation, or you have to have at least 50% vegetation, which means all of your asphalt roofs, concrete buildings, everything can be no more than 50% lot coverage. So if you have if you've got 2 acres, that's 87,000 square feet. Basically, you can put 43,560 square feet of concrete, asphalt, building, whatever on it, so long as you're 20 feet away from the property line, less than 20 feet high, and at least a 412 pitch. The RCC zone is 35% total lot coverage. These are generally smaller lots and smaller homes. So there's no differentiation between the rear yard and the total yard. And then the HP zones is 50% vegetation again. And so, the HP zones, I think the risk of that is that you run is you have large lots, people combining large lots, and you could get a lot of roof surface area coverage over there in the HP zones. But at any rate, that's the planning commission's consideration. Brandon mentioned we have the Title 1112 reorg, and we think we could, depending whatever happens with the metal, we can clean that language up. I don't think it's a real substantive change. If the city determines metal is in the best interest, then we'll clean up that language, eliminating the provision between 12.5 foot tall metal buildings versus other buildings built with other materials.
I really like the approach because, as I mentioned in the last meeting, I think we've got to be equitable to all the citizens. We can't allow big, high buildings down in the flatlands and not in other areas. That wouldn't be, I think, equitable. So I like the approach here. I like the setback and things of that nature. But I still disagree with the fact that we're going to put off somebody till we get around to the other ordinances who's waiting to build a metal building, why we're going ahead and approving a height deal. So, I don't have a vote, but my recommendation would be we take care of this all at once. And if we're going to include metal, let's just do it now.
And the area that the building standards are held is just in a different part of the code. So you've got one section that outlines all of these residential zones. And then another section that has fencing ordinances and driveway standards and all sorts of other things. So that's just another code provision, but we can move forward if you want to defer 7, and I can discuss 8 as well.
You know, I don't want to defer, I just want to get it taken care of because we keep addressing this and keep addressing this. And maybe we could make the change this tonight based upon the fact that it's conditional that we change the metal buildings if that's what the council so desires. So I think the staff has done a good job on this in regards to trying to make it equitable. So thank you very much for your work, and we appreciate the work of the Planning Commission. I know what brought this up initially was metal buildings, but things have changed. You know, at one point in time, it was they were too tall. So we're not going to please everybody. We just need to make sure we're equitable as much as we could be. So, okay. Anything else? Council, you have any questions for Mr. Hess while he's up at the podium? That would be the time. Looks like you're off the hook on that one, Scott. So looks like you're going to also lead the discussion on item number 8.
Yeah, I'm not back yet.
Pardon?
Do you want to decide on?
I think the deferral was we weren't going to make any decisions until we heard 7 and 8. So we'll go back and do 6, then we'll make a decision on 7 and we'll make a decision on 8.
All right, number 8. So staff prepared an ordinance that would permit the restriction of metal. We can eliminate that provision in the code, is essentially the ordinance that you have. That was the ordinance that was presented to Planning Commission in Planning Commission's discussion about this. And we did talk about like the fabled, aircraft hangar type of building. I have one near my home in West Kaysville that's nearly 20,000 square feet that you could build in the city. It's been there forever and ever. It was house antique cars, and now it's just within the fabric of the neighborhood, and it's on 5 acres and it's huge. Just is what it is, great big metal building. So the Planning Commission in their recommendation of saying lot coverage should rule, setback should rule, but no metal buildings, essentially, that those will be self-regulating in size based on costs or material costs, and homeowners' desire to have those things match the home, essentially. So Planning Commission's recommendation was unanimous to keep the ordinance as it is today, and staff brings that forward to you, just as Planning Commission recommendation, but also with the ordinance that would ultimately, if you decide to pass it, permit metal buildings back in the city.
Of course, the easy thing would be just to leave the whole ordinance as it is, but I don't think that's our goal. So any questions for Mr. Hess?
I do. Okay.
Councilmember Extra?
So Planning Commission says no metal. They just don't want to allow metal.
The caveat being over 200 square feet and taller than 12 and a half feet. So they
Okay.
keep the ordinance as it is today.
So that's,
Tough shed.
That's a tough shed.
So a
It's
tough shed.
Yeah, prefab tough shed.
okay. So that can be metal,
Mhm.
but they don't want anything bigger than that being metal.
Right.
And the reason being, the neighbors aren't gonna like it?
Yeah, we've heard a lot of things from neighbors, and that building, the one that keeps getting referenced,
Okay,
that's dark gray down off of 1700. It was legally constructed and permitted at the time. It met the setbacks. It's over 30 feet from the property line on one side, 40 plus on the other. It essentially matches the color of the home. It's gray, house is gray, garage door's white, garage door on the house is white. I've been here 6 months, but I would have made the same call that the planning department made at the time that was built, which was that it essentially matches the home. And it just comes down to, some people think that corrugated standing seam steel buildings are not attractive or don't fit in with the character of the neighborhood.
okay. I have a problem with that. To me, but is that really the complaint, is that it's metal or that it was big?
I don't know, Brandon.
Both.
I would say it's both. What you get complaints about big metal buildings. That's the short story.
Which is height and size, but what we're doing now is we're allowing height and we're allowing a greater size. And the only thing we're restricting is metal. Councilmember Swanson?
One of the issues with that particular building at the time too was concern that it was being used for commercial purposes in a residential zone that had there was more concern than just the size and the material that it was constructed with. And anyway, just to add a little bit of color, there was concern.
So,
That one's a different one.
Was that a different one?
Yep, we have two of them.
Poor boy.
okay,
And then to address we have, I can't remember your name, Marcy, who addressed the metal, the like pre-stamped steel that goes up on single family homes right now. We also have a provision that the materials be similar to the single family home. The state legislature has taken away our ability to regulate exterior building and cladding materials on single family homes. So an argument I would make is if a homeowner clad their home in this high-end stamped steel product that looks like distressed wood and then wanted to spend that money on their accessory building to make it match, I would permit it. So personally, as a planning group, that's a call I would make, is because.
but right now it's prohibited because it's metal.
But there's also a provision that you can match materials to your main dwelling. So there's this circular question of what rules, and the state legislature has said you can't limit or restrict materials. So I would argue that if somebody built a home as a standing vertical seam metal building and then wanted an accessory building to match it, they could get it. So.
But you got a conflict, right?
That's the type of, land use law, and when the legislature dabbles in it, that's really interesting and kind of tricky, but that's what I would interpret it that way personally. But I guess the reverse needs to be considered is wood, we have other call outs in our commercial design standards of wood-like materials, and those come out of the masonry products that are like a hardy board or other metal or other material that cities grappled with years ago on the transition from stucco to other cement board materials. And I think, metal, it's just another one of those materials that it's difficult to say that particular metal is good without calling out a one manufacturer or something else and say this one's bad. And
yeah, here's my problem, just since I have the floor here, is so we're allowing buildings bigger, which was a complaint. We're allowing buildings higher, which is a complaint. But we're sticking ourselves on the fact that there was a complaint against metal.
Which I think is probably down the list really far
Which,
on the complaint, actually.
Yeah, size and height probably are the bigger, and that's my only concern, is that we're kind of picking and choosing what we want to amend here, but as they say, mayor doesn't have a vote, so we'll go to council member.
Well, you might tonight.
Well, I already talked to council member Severing, so he's given me his vote. I'm gonna vote on it. No, I did talk to him. Okay, council member Barker, do you have anything you'd like to talk to Mr. Hess about, or anything you'd like to bring up for discussion?
I actually had a conversation today with Mr. Hess. I think a vital thing that we should be considering, and you mentioned it, how many building permits were pulled or tried to get pulled that were denied? And so that means they're not building their buildings out in their backyard. So the stuff they wanted to store in that building, where's it now being stored? Just stacked in their backyard with a tarp over it? What would we rather have? And second point, I have a friend that built a big shop and it's stucco. Would I rather look at a stucco wall or a metal wall? Either one of them looks great, but I'd rather be looking at metal personally. I don't like stucco. So, but that's my opinion. So this is why we're regulating based on opinion. Why, maybe Councilman Swanson likes stucco better than metal, but I mean, that's our opinion. It's like, why are we deciding for the city? It should be, I think we should open it up to allow metal.
Okay, anything else? Council member Stoker, do you have anything you'd like to add while Mr. Hess is here, or generate a discussion regarding?
I do.
Go ahead.
I agree with the planning commission's that one size has never fit all. It doesn't matter what you're doing, it doesn't fit. One size never fits all. So I like what they've come up with, and it seems reasonable with the zones that fits. And also, I mean, over the years, building materials have changed. you know, they're just not the same. They've improved, they're different. And there are some really nice looking metal buildings. So I have no problem with metal. I think that metal's changed too. It's not just your ugly metal. I don't know how else to not ugly anymore.
So should the ordinance read, we won't allow ugly metal? Or just wondering.
They cannot be ugly on a fence.
Okay, no ugly fenced metal.
I wish we could just change the ordinance to thou shalt not cause a problem for thy neighbor and let your neighbor be reasonable. It's really, really hard. It's, you know, we were trying to, and again, as it was pointed out, planning likes specifics, right? But it's really so hard to paint everybody with a broad brush, because you might have a really nitpicky neighbor that is like, done, that's ugly, and is gonna complain really loudly. And then you've got one that's like, yeah, build what you want, that's great, it's your property. You know, I tend to be more of the latter kind of person. So, you know, my opinion, and I'm trying to wrap my head around exactly the way this ordinance is worded as being proposed, but I like, you know, 25% of your lot, however big your lot is, right? I showed these guys a picture of my brother's outbuilding, which is like 10 square feet. We call it the Mondo garage. You know, you should be able to, and as Ryan pointed out, they're gonna have their stuff anyway. Would you rather have it covered in the building, or do you want to have it in the backyard gathering rest or whatever it's gonna be? People are funny about their stuff. So is it being put across all of the zones? And is it consistent with the size of the lot for the accessory building? Or are we still putting restrictions like, you know, the Carneys are like 188 square feet off? Or are we just saying, 25%? Because I really like just 25%.
Well, there's nuance there. So we didn't touch any of the lot coverages. The planning commission left the lot coverages as they're currently written in the zones. So they're all different. They're 25% of the rear yard in R zones, 50% of the lot total in RE20. So the Carneys could build
43,000 feet.
times 3, no, times 1.5, 60,000 square feet of total concrete building, outbuilding. So I think.
Don't give Tara any ideas. Don't go there.
I think
Tara just wants to build something to fit her stuff, which I can understand.
The RE20 zone just says you can, thou shalt keep at least 50% of this in vegetation. Everything else, it doesn't matter. You could have 100 square foot building and the rest of it paved. You could just go out and asphalt, concrete it, but 50% coverage. RCC is 35% total coverage and HP zone 50% total coverage. So they're not perfect. They're not perfectly one-to-one, but the ratio is different per the zone for whatever reason. Again, that those zones had those ratios. The planning commission didn't change those. But when an application comes in, the way we would approach it would be the same. Is the building far enough away for the height that it is? And what is your total lot coverage that you're permitted? And how does this affect it? And it's just a matter of subtraction or addition to figure out.
But Scott, isn't it true that someone in RE20, I mean, on R1, 8, 10, or 12, if they had 2 lots, that they could build a bigger building because they only have to, it's the 25%. And up there is the 50%?
No, probably not, because it's the 25% of what we would consider the rear yard. So we would have to make a determination of, it's codified, but it would be the foundation of the back of the structure to the property line, and then the extent of the length, the lot. So, not every lot is perfectly square too. That's where this stuff, the math gets screwy on what's considered a rear or a front or a side yard.
So just assuming that they were deep lots in both cases, equal in the R1, 8, 10, and 12.5, because there's the 25%.
You'll always be able to get something bigger in RE20 because you can cover 50% of your lot in something.
But I'm talking about the R1, 8, 10, and 12.5. If somebody up in HP 1, 2, or 3, they have the same size lot. Can they build the same size building?
HP zone will be able to build a bigger building. Because it's not a function of the percentage of the rear lot.
It's just leaving 50% vegetation.
50% vegetation, so it's. Since I like to draw the diagrams. So this is
I like your diagrams too.
here's
They
your-
help me picture it.
Here's your lot, here's your house, here's your front yard setback, your rear yard, or your side yard, which is less, and your rear yard. The definition of a rear yard is everything from this line here. So in an R18 or R110, they can build, just for ease of this, 25%. They can cover 25% of that. So the same situation over in HP's 1 is they can cover 50% of the entire lot. Of course, you have to have the setbacks to do it, but that's how different the percentage can be when you measure off 25% of the rear yard can be covered
Versus 50% of the whole.
50% of the whole thing versus 35, here's your house, and then it's 35%. And that's why I say you take a function of the square footage of the lot, you add up all of the concrete that's there, new concrete that's there, and even the 50% we bumped up against it before. And people are at that point making the decision between, can I make it's always pool houses. Can I make my pool house a little bigger? But I have to reduce my walkways. And that's a trade-off. I can make them, because it's impervious surface. We don't care if it's shingles or hard surface. And it comes down to a function of predictability for your storm water management. Over a certain percentage of land coverage and impervious area in any one area of the city, and you'll overrun your storm detention system. So they're calculated based on these percentages, and that helps drive the total size of a 100-year storm event for any one storm detention basin.
I guess that's my question, because we've always been concerned about having more runoff off that hill. But if I'm understanding this correctly, they can put more of the ground in cement and impervious materials. This seems contrary to what we're trying to accomplish up there on the hill.
And that's likely why the HP zone had a 25% footprint of the main home. And I think the 15-foot tall was more a function of, you seem to be able to see the tall buildings that are sitting up on the hill.
But now we're taking that away, right?
So now you go
25% limit is gone.
Yep. Well, yeah, that was the size of, that's saying, regardless of the size of your lot, you can have mega lot. If your house is this big, you can build a building that's 25% of the size of your.
Yeah, but now that's gone.
Yeah.
Now they can just build as long as they leave 50%
Yeah.
in vegetation from
But
the
they-
whole lot, not
but
just the
they-
backyard.
But they can do that anyway with the walkway provision. You connect it and all of a sudden this building can be, this big because it's part of the main home. So you're really trading one big structure that's connected for potentially two structures that are not connected other than by a walkway.
Okay. Councilmember Swanson, we haven't heard from you. What would you like to add to the discussion?
How much time do we have?
Well, Brandon Bell's
Oh.
gone. Brandon Bell's gone, so,
Right, Mason.
yeah, Brandon Mason is gone, so.
Cheryl and I have a unique perspective on this because we've been here.
Right, you've heard all the complaints.
Right? Cheryl, 10 years, and I'm coming up on 8. I think a lot of this came as the city was struggling to figure out how were we going to manage growth. Were we, we were looking at form-based code at one point. We were looking at all kinds of things. And I think in that effort, in not looking at things from a broad perspective here, we ended up with doing different things in different areas, trying to do our best. I think this shows a great evolution and a great movement forward over time, recognizing where we got things right and where we didn't get things right. And I'm very appreciative to the Planning Commission and staff for taking this kind of 30,000-foot view and helping us see things. I think we're also seeing from the state more deregulation, if you will, where so many communities across the state and really across the country are trying to limit what can be done in their cities. And I think the state has taken the opinion that in some ways infringes upon landowner rights. And so they're taking steps to force certain issues. I think we mitigate some of that, what I think is sometimes state overreach, by responding to where we've made mistakes in the past. I like what we have here. I think what Commissioner Mason mentioned as far as the metal buildings go, it wasn't so much that they didn't like metal buildings, they couldn't find a way to write an ordinance so that you could segregate what metal buildings were acceptable and which ones weren't.
But in your opinion, do we have the right to tell a citizen what kind of metal they can use?
I don't think we do, and I think that's a lot of the change that we've seen over time, at least in my service on the council, in attitudes and opinions have come because of you're trying to do one thing and then you realize that you've overstepped. And you've actually, in trying to protect one person, you've infringed on another. And it's a very fine line when you cross over that. I don't have a problem with anything that I see here. I don't have a problem with the metal buildings. Somebody is not going to be happy and others are going to be happy. Such is the nature of our job. I think this, of course, I've said this in the past about some of the other ordinances that we're not correcting. I think this is a good place for us to be. Another year or two down the road, I might change my mind and get better information. But for now, my crystal ball says this is a good route to go.
I like the approach, as I stated before. I just want to make sure we understand sometimes there's unintended consequences. So I just wanted to make sure the council understood the difference between the 25 and the 50 and the result on that. I think our job is to try to be as fair and equitable as we can, because you're right, 50% are going to be happy, 50% are going to be unhappy. But as long as we can look ourselves in the mirror, say we've been fair and equitable to the best that we can, I think we just have to move forward. So, all right, anything else, Mr. Hess?
No, thank you. These are really fun policy considerations and I really enjoy it. So thanks for giving us the chance to go through.
Okay. Well, I would like to then council start backwards on this because I think 6 has a bearing on what we do with 8. I think the question on the table is the fact, are we going to ask for an amendment to allow metal buildings in 8? If I've drilled this down right, because it prohibits metal buildings. Isn't that in, Scott, did you say that was in 8? Or was that in 7? I'm not that good with numbers, but.
I thought 8 allowed, if we pass what was in our packet, it would allow metal buildings.
Correct. Yeah.
8 does?
8 as written with an ordinance, the ordinance eliminates the restriction against metal buildings. Brandon Bell just reminded me too, that just in this, because it was brought up earlier, that another provision that the Planning Commission considered and supported was eliminating the 60-foot separation requirement between these large buildings and neighboring property owners, structures, mostly because it comes down to who built first. If you were lucky enough to build your accessory building before your neighbor constructs their home, it could be at a varying distance. So sort of eliminating the provisions that restrict your ability as a property owner to do something based on a location of something on neighbor's property.
And I appreciate Brandon bringing that up because it's really true. It's not fair to the last in guy. So, all right, council, I'd like to start with ordinance number 2021-39.
37, going out of order.
Yeah, but they don't have to be passed in order as long as we have them all, right? Or, I mean, you're the recorder.
I would prefer them in the order we have.
Okay, then we'll go backwards. This will be 37.
Thank you.
Which agenda item number?
8. We're changing the ordinance number from 2021-39 to 2021-37. And then we'll flip a coin to see what the next number is. So with that, I would be looking for a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-39 as it's been presented. 37, excuse me.
Mayor,
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we approve ordinance 2021-37 as written, allowing metal accessory buildings.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Barker. Do we have a second to that motion? Second by Councilmember Swanson. Any further discussion? Council, I'll be calling for a roll call vote on this to approve ordinance 2021-37. Start with you, Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Stoker.
Yes.
Councilmember Ekstrom.
Yes.
Councilmember Swanson.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. What's your liking? What would you like to go to? Item number 6 or 7?
That's the same number.
7.
Hey, there you go, Councilmember Barker. We won't have to change that. Good idea. All right, Councilmember Barker has made a suggestion that we address item number 7, which is ordinance number 20-21-38 regarding to amending accessory building standards in the following single-family zones: RE20, R1 -5, RCC, HP-1, HP-2, and HP-3. Do we have a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-38?
Mayor, sorry, this is something I just, in reviewing, I've caught. I
Okay,
think we should eliminate this provision in this ordinance that you're talking about right now, that talks, because it gives some weird measurements in the RE20 zone for rear yards that I think are eliminated by the new size that we're talking about. So Scott's nodding yes. So it would just be 25% would be the controlling thing, and there wouldn't be this modification that I think would artificially deflate the size allowed.
yeah, that's not our intention. So Scott, Brandon, are you in agreement with that?
That was it. I just wanted to make sure we didn't
That's
have
good.
something to bring back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Call. So we'd be looking to a motion to approve ordinance -2021-38 as amended. Here on the screen before us.
Mayor, I'll move that we approve ordinance 2021-38 as amended on the screen.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have 2 seconds. So with council members Stoker on that one. Any further discussion? This being an ordinance, I will now call for a roll call vote. Councilmember Swanson,
Yes.
Councilmember Stoker,
Yes.
Councilmember Ekstrom,
Yes.
Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, now we're going to go back to item number 6, which references ordinance number 20-21-39. We want to keep our recorder happy here. This is an ordinance to the amend accessory building standards in the R zones. Do we have a motion to approve ordinance number 20-21-39?
Mayor, I move that, oh, is there
Sorry.
a question?
So
Hold on,
this,
hold on. Mr. Call, go ahead.
okay.
Got to keep these guys in line. They just want to start speaking out.
I apologize, Mayor. This is the provision that was just stricken under number 8. So I
The
don't
metal
want,
buildings.
yeah, so I don't want to include it back in. So we are going to just say this one is removed as well. So it would be good in the motion to recommend that or that the staff have the ability to make sure that this 1031 matches what was in the other ordinance.
That makes sense.
Is there anything else, John? Because we only have to have the ordinance in front of us, basically.
Yeah, so that's why I've got it redacted now, is to make sure that you got the right version in front of you.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Call?
I don't believe so.
All right, thank you. Susan, did you have a comment?
I just need to make sure I know what I'm doing tomorrow. when I go in.
Yeah, this will be ordinance number 2021-39.
No, just as far as removing and replacing and
Yeah, so we're just
Yeah.
scratching 1 and 2.
I just need to know what I'm doing, that's all.
Okay,
We all need-
glad somebody's here.
Mine's the children.
Okay,
Okay, can I make the motion now?
yes, Councilmember Extra, why don't you proceed with the motion here?
All
I'm anxious
right,
to hear what you're gonna say.
Mayor, I move that we approve ordinance number 2021-39 as amended and as in compliance with ordinance number 2021-37, which was passed previously.
John, does that satisfy
Yes.
you? All right. Do we have a second to Councilmember Ekstrom's motion?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Barker. Do we have any further discussion? All right, this being an ordinance, we'll do a roll call vote. Councilmember Stoker.
Yes.
Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Ekstrom.
Yes.
Councilmember Swanson.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. All right. We're going to move on to number 9 on our agenda, which is a yes, Councilmember Swanson.
Just a general statement for anybody who might be listening, no 40,000 foot accessory buildings. Just had to get that out there for a neighbor.
Okay, so now we're going to have a discussion which will be led by Mr. Call, our city manager and attorney. He's going to lead us in a discussion regarding a multi-parcel drainage agreement with the Utah Department of Transportation. This is in regards to land located at approximately 1500 North Washington Boulevard. John?
Thank you, Mayor. So, council, I think I've warned you that my staff reports will be short when it's an agreement, because the idea is that we hope you would read the agreement. This is the second agreement like this that's been presented to the council. The first one related to the widening project and some of the things going on out here on Washington and 2700. So they are very similar agreements, but there are some differences. In that agreement, the city was taking some UDOT water and UDOT pipe was taking some city water. So it was a trade-off. This one is just a situation where the development known as Cooperstown will be putting some of their stormwater into a UDOT box, which then is piped under Washington Boulevard and then connects to the city system. So UDOT has traditionally used our system in that spot. So they would not be adding any additional water. This would just be city development water that would be added to the system. The provision that is indicated in the staff report that is the most important are the long-term maintenance obligations. Basically, the city is agreeing to perform maintenance where we cause problems. And then also if the water causes any additional problems, that we're responsible for it. The only reason that would be a concern, I think Lauren had to sneak out, is that, as we all know, the government agency who regulates stormwater is not in the room or even in the state. They are a national organization, the EPA. And they will eventually have regulations which will increase the strictness for our water discharge into the environment. It's been something that has been an ongoing change. And so we expect to see more. That will impact not only our stormwater system, but also UDOT system. And so when that happens, we will enter into some sort of a future agreement, since water's coming from both of us. This agreement doesn't contemplate that, but that's the reason that I think staff recommends approval of this agreement, is we don't see an issue, because if this EPA is making us do it, they're making everybody doing it. And there'll be some probably countywide cooperative agreements for water treatment of stormwater when we get to that point. So we don't see that as a big risk to the city. Any questions?
I have a question. How do you determine who caused the problem?
You would be shocked how well they are, how capable they are of locating the illicit discharge point. So usually they can identify, an oil spill, gas spill, where it happened, because all the residue doesn't go away. So they basically do it. Fire Marshal Barker it's a very similar process where they start at the extent of the problem. In Fire Marshal, it's the flame, and go back to the point of origin, and they just use a scientific process to get there.
So would we have recourse against whoever caused the discharge?
Yes, the state does give us some pretty hefty fines and things we can impose on people who are doing illicit discharges, is what they're called.
Does anyone have any questions about illicit discharges? Okay, any questions for Mr. Call before we proceed in approving this agreement? All right, I would be looking for a motion to approve agreement number A11-2021 in regards to the multi-purchase drainage agreement that's referenced here. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Swanson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Stoker. Any further discussion? I'll do a roll call vote on this, that being agreement. Councilmember Swanson,
Yes.
Councilmember Ekstrom,
Yes.
Councilmember Stoker,
Yes.
Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Motion passes. All right, we'll now enter into item number 10. We'll receive some very exciting and outstanding council department reports. We'll be starting with Mr. Barker, council member. He'll be reporting on building and planning.
Yes. As we noticed tonight, our planning department's been busy doing accessory building updates. And also the general plan advisory committee recommendations going to planning commission soon. And so then it'll be coming to us hopefully after that, before the end of the year. So that's coming up close. And then with building, some of our contractor friends probably know MyGov is now up and running, and it's running real great. We're working through a lot of issues I'm finding out. So they're now able to submit plans electronically, get permits. It's not working so well, but they're working on it. Hopefully it will be fixed soon. We're working on it.
And sometimes when you start some new software, the term seamless and transparent is used. That's a whole new definition when new software comes in.
So our staff is working
Yes.
daily on trying to fix this.
Right. I think that's what we have to do. We have to try to automate as many processes as we can, and we're gonna have bumps along the road, but long-term, it's the right thing to do. So anything else, Councilmember Barker, this evening?
That's it.
John, you filled in for Councilmember Severing earlier. Would you like to fill on the Public Works report?
Sure.
No, you say no. Yeah, because you don't know what you wanna. And it's 8:05, but if
Dave
you'd like
sent
to.
me a text.
Oh,
message.
then let's go. Let's go. Okay. If you have information, go ahead.
So he has four things. One is the new stoplight on Alberta and 400 East will be going active in the coming week. It'll first start out flashing red as a four-way stop, and we'll transition to, that's to just bring attention to it so everyone knows it's there. And then it'll transition to a normal functioning light. So if you get questions, that's what it's about. Because of weather, the rain, we can't pick up wet leaves. the vacuum in the truck doesn't work well, so they'll be delayed, but we will get caught up when it dries out. And that we've had overwhelming use of that truck in the past couple of days. We think we had 300 requests since Saturday or something like that. Because of that, we are letting people who are bringing leaves only to the green waste pit in for free. So leaves only can drop off for free. Hours are Monday and Wednesday 3 to 6 and Saturday 10 to 2. And the last day of the green waste pit is November 20th. So it'll be closed for the season after Saturday, November 20th. And that's what they wanted to pass along.
John, for that report. We'll now enter into additional public comments if there are any this evening. John, if you would watch online also.
Hi, Jill, North Ogden. So did you just approve me building a Connex building with approving the steel accessory buildings? Second is, where does steel studs fit into that if I'm building a structure, all steel studs? Okay. Okay.
As long as it's not ugly. You've been approved, as long as it's not ugly. John, do we have anyone online that would like to make a comment?
Not at this point.
Caroline?
Caroline Hightower. I was just wondering what the next step is on my situation. If you have opinions tonight, or is it something that I need to continue to pursue, and what I need to do?
Mr. Call, would you like to answer that question? What next steps are? I think.
So council, would you like staff to approach the developer about eliminating the trail? And then we also would bring in information about the purpose of the trail connection for you to consider as well, and put that on a future agenda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've had some discussion with the Director of Parks and Recreation about trails, and so I think we would like to also hear from.
Why?
Could you
And
get with Tiffany, and I think it's important to hear from her too. So we'll talk to our Director of Parks and Recreation. We'll talk to the developer, and we'll gather information and get that on the future. Could we give a time frame, John, so it doesn't go on forever?
so I think we probably would do the December 14th meeting.
Okay, we'll shoot for December 14th.
All right, do I need to continue to do anything, or just wait to hear from you on the 14th then?
Just, we will be in contact from staff.
Okay.
But before then, so that you're aware of everything and can be involved in the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Spencer Alexander, 1740 North, 150 East, on the banks of our lovely Coldwater Creek. Unfortunately, I missed the presentation about the no trail and some of those issues there, but I have kept up on it a little bit, so I would like to make a couple comments. It's such a hard place to know that I feel for the occupants. I'm sad about some incompetence in some areas on planning, but I do feel that it's in our best interest to keep the trail. And there's a number of reasons for that. I'm against moving the creek, as has been previously discussed. The trail, the reason I want the trail is I want to be able to have access for many people. I was actually asked whether I would sign in protest of the trail, and it was kind of a hard position for me to be put in, but I thought about it for a long time. And it would be really inconsiderate of me to sign off on stopping the trail and then continue to invite people to try to improve Coldwater Creek. Because not only do I hope for that to be something of beauty and recreation for our citizens, but anybody that wants to enjoy it. And so as more often than not, we lose more public fishing, public recreation to private property. In this instance, I have to say that I want that trail to go through. I think it's important. Now, as to the many issues with that comes with crime and things like that, unfortunately, if you knew half the things people did in their own homes, I mean, you probably think, we wouldn't think about what happens on a trail. I mean, there's just issues no matter what. But I think keeping those places is so important. So, there you go.
Thank you, Spencer. John, still no one online? Anyone else like to make a comment this evening?
My name is Matt Obrey, North Ogden resident, lifetime resident. I commend the council for addressing this difficult issue of accessory buildings. I wish they would have done it 3 years ago, so I could have gotten mine, but thank you for doing that. And then also, one thing with these accessory buildings and the height restrictions, or does there need to be a standardized location to determine that height? Something to think about. I don't think in the past there has been a.
I think we do now, Scott, don't we? What the height maximum 25 feet measures to?
Yeah, so this is a 6-foot fence or at property line. Beginning at 3 feet away from the property line, you can build 10 feet tall, and that's between 3 and 5 feet. So that's your tough sheds, your standard pre-developed sheds can go as close as 3 feet to the property line. Beginning at 5 feet, it's 1 foot of distance is 1 foot of height, all the way up to 20 feet away from the property line is 25 feet tall.
Is that from the tallest part of the structure? I think that, is that what you're
My
asking,
question
Matt?
Is that at curb level out in front of the house? Is that,
Yeah, so
where are we determining that?
we measure that from average grade on the lot. So same as our houses are 35 feet tall from top back of curb, but you have an uphill and a downhill lot revision. Same thing exists, you know, if this were on a lot that's shaped at an angle, we typically take the average grade of that angle or measure it from the center point and split the difference. In other cases, if it's an extreme slope, it's just total height at a singular point, and then you might have to bury a portion of the building into the hillside, or sink a portion in if it's like a downhill dropping lot. But yeah, there's nuances like that. Not everything, you know, the world isn't flat and all the lots aren't square, so we deal with that. Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Matt, thank you. Anyone else this evening?
Campbell, 2739 North, 450 East. I'd just like to thank you for going over these amendments and for your consideration and being I like your phrase, fair and equitable to all the citizens in North Ogden. We appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you. Anyone else? And before we go to council, mayor, and staff comments, I do want to commend our planning department again. These are not easy decisions, and you can see, when they get permits and things of that nature, it's fairly complicated, and we've got a good staff. And I also want to compliment the planning commission. Even though the council did vote against the recommendation, they do a great job. I think they're very thorough, and I appreciate their service also. Mr. Udall, did you want to say one final thing?
Yes, I do.
Okay, we've aggregated all your time, so.
The new approval, we've got permits out pending. How long do you think we would be able to have? How long until this is in effect and a permit can be approved?
I think it's effective as passed, isn't it, John? It's effective ordinance now, so I've looked at the planning folks to see what their time frame is. They've got a lot going, so Scott, maybe you could just answer that question quickly.
We do 5 to 14 business days on building permit reviews. So if you have a denied building permit that you need to resubmit, then resubmit. If you have a pending one that is denied because of a height issue or something like that, I would send an email to Kai, Brandon, or myself, whoever sent you that denial letter, and we'll essentially begin that reprocessing under the new ordinance beginning tomorrow. So you'll just get filtered into our other 50 open permits that we have right now in the city.
But the goal is no longer than 14 days, but it's, you know, our planning commission, as you can imagine, is fairly overwhelmed with things, so.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Council, do you have anything that's come from citizens you'd like to talk about? Councilmember Barker.
Yep, my last meeting I was at, about a month ago, I was asked to go look at the fencing out of the village of Prominent Point on the creek. I went out there and looked, and I spoke with our planning director as well. And this is what I found out. As long as, if there's no trail there's no fence required, the owner will have to put up the fence. Once it becomes a public trail, there'll be a fence required, but it'll be similar, all that would be required is a split rail fence similar to what's next to the lodge. So if you don't want a trail, then there's no fence required. Did I explain that correctly? Yeah. So it's on between the developer and the homeowner if you want to put up a fence.
Oh, along the creek, you mean?
Mhm.
Like, oh,
So instead
I
of
don't
falling down the
wanna-
bank, it's up to, yeah. the
Yeah, I
city.
don't want to.
Okay. I've got, second, we got an email from Erica Royland about suicide prevention up at the amphitheater. And I think we should since we've already opened up the amphitheater to community events, we should let these people do a community event up there. And we should push that out and say, let's plan this for next September.
Okay, and yes, we did get, I think the council got that. I had a brief correspondence with John. And we love the demand. We want to use that to its fullest extent that we can in its condition. But I would suggest that community events or city-sponsored events or supported events, the council is made aware of those. As the demand increases, I think it's important that the council be made aware of those, and in some cases actually has approval on those as things ramp up. So what we need to do, unless there's major objections, council, is I think what Councilmember Barker is saying, we've already set the precedent on letting that be used by community events. And so now we have a request for a suicide prevention event. Once again, to the statement of fair and equitable, we probably need to get back to her and let her know that as long as there's not a previous booking on that she can plan on the use of it.
I think she was pretty open on, flexible on dates, right? So we just need to pencil something in for, so would the next step for her be to say that we approve it and then she can schedule it with Tiffany? Is that kind of how that's gonna work?
Yes, I think at some point in time, the council needs to define what a community event is, what a city-sponsored event is, and what a city-supported event is. Because my understanding is under those conditions, there's no rental fee currently.
So that would be part of that.
Mr. Call, do you have a comment? We have a great relationship, so I can kid you.
I thought you raised your eyebrows. I thought that was my cue. But yeah, so we want to bring back those categories so the council can say what's given and what the expectation is as far as city involvement on, there might be 4 tiers of types of events, or maybe there's just 2, but we do have a policy that we've been working on that we want to bring to the council, as well as like with this one happening next September, we anticipate that the Arts Guild will help bring a list of all of the events categorized so that the council knows everything that's going to happen, and then also bring back additional updates. That's one of the things we've talked about, having that group be involved in. So,
and I think it's important because when it's a city-sponsored event, citizens look at that as it's approved, and if we don't know what's going on, we can find ourselves in kind of a lurch, so to speak. So I think it's important that we not only know what the event is, but what it entails. Because a general description could get us in some deep water, Not that
Devil's in
Mr.
the
Call would let
details.
that happen, yes. Not that Mr. Call would let that happen to us. Anything else, council?
Can I say one more? This one's quick.
We're aggregating your time also, but go ahead.
Not to start a political discussion, but this is COVID related. I got the numbers today for line of duty deaths from firefighters last year, and there was 112 line of duty deaths among firefighters, and 86 were COVID related. So that's almost, yeah, that's a lot. And this year we've already had 136 COVID related firefighter deaths, and there's been 231 law enforcement COVID related deaths.
Is that nationally?
Nationally.
I believe that's the number one, COVID now is the number one killer of
First responders.
first
First
responders.
responders, but I don't get the numbers among public works or any of those other city people. It's worth getting your shot and not becoming one of these statistics. That's all.
Yeah, it's, the pandemic's not over,
Yeah.
I think, as we all recognize, and we respect people's right to make their decision. But it is, it's a tough situation, no doubt about it. Do you have anything else, Councilmember Barker, Councilmember Stoker, Councilmember Swanson?
I just have one quick thing. Brian, you already brought up the suicide awareness thing, so thank you. The other is just an expression that it's getting late. Cheryl, stop it. An expression of appreciation from this council member for you all recognizing that we're imperfect. And that we don't always get things perfect the first time out, and allowing us the safety, if you will, of being able to change our minds and make different decisions as new information comes our direction. It's in today's political world, it can be suicide to change your mind on something. And I'm grateful to live in a community where that is not the case, where you can make the best decision you can and then later realize, we need to rethink that, and then rethink it and make a different decision. I'm grateful to live in that kind of a community. So I'm grateful to all of you for your willingness to let us be human.
How many of you read my article in the Connection magazine this month? The minority. So just to support what Council Member Swanson is saying is, I had a story in there about a lady, she was at the grocery store, and she went out to get in her car, and there were 4 individuals sitting in her car. So she pulled out her gun and told them to get lost, and they hightailed it out of there. She all of a sudden recognized it wasn't her car. And so she thought, I better get down to the police station and tell them what I've just done. So she got to the police station, there were 4 guys sitting there filing a complaint for assault with a deadly weapon. And so I think to that point, the moral of the story is, look, we all make mistakes, but the important thing is that we admit that we made mistakes, right? So thanks for that comment, Councilmember Swanson. We're trying our best. All right, staff, do you have anything?
We just have this special meeting to canvass the election on the 16th.
Yes.
So plan on that, those of you that will be here.
Yeah, I'd like to invite the entire city to that meeting because Councilmember Stoker will be conducting that. And this may, she's didn't run for election, so I think having the room full and supporting her would be just totally awesome. Because I won't be here.
You repeat that, what meeting?
It's a canvas meeting for the election where we certify the results of the election. So I think that's, at this point, the only item on the agenda, but it could grow.
We should make it grow.
No.
So everyone else has to come because you 2 are gone.
And you can see that the council works hard, but we like to have fun too. Can't take life too serious. John, would you just take 1 minute before Councilmember Stoker motions for dismissal and just give a brief overview of One North Ogden, what happened so on our webpage, so people kind of just briefly.
Sure. So the city has a Facebook account that's North Ogden City and has been for years. we've added one North Ogden to the description of that webpage to indicate the goal of uniting as a city. And we are planning on some additional changes potentially to the website and to Facebook to make that more helpful. One of the things that Katie Gerard, our human resource person, has done is found a way to embed our Facebook page in our latest news section of the city website. So people don't need a Facebook account to see the information. In fact, they can hyperlink to a new non-Facebook account page that still shows the information, comments, so that people can participate. And other things like that are the type of things that this frontline staff is working on. So
Yeah, so we're not changing the logo of the city.
correct.
We're keeping that. It's just our Facebook page. And the genesis for that is, look, we understand there's different roads that could be taken, but we all want to be headed to the same destination, which is making North Ogden a greater place to live, because it's already a great place to live. I think that's all of our goal, even though we might take different roads. Hopefully that's all of our destination. So with that, we'd be looking for a motion from Councilmember Stoker to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Stoker.
Second.
Have a second non-debatable motion